It is now 6:55. We're 5 minutes away from the scheduled start time of the meeting, 7 o'clock, the Urbana City Council meeting. This is just an audio check. We should get started in about 5 minutes. It is now 6:58. We're just a couple minutes away from the scheduled start time of tonight's Urbana City Council meeting at 7 o'clock. We hope to get started in a couple minutes.
Hello?
Hi, Sharice. You're in the meeting. We haven't quite called it to order yet. We're still waiting. We're still waiting on a couple people to join.
Okie doke. Thanks.
Hey, Jared.
Yes.
Not Jared, Jason. Sorry about that. Jason, can you see hands that are raised from your perspective?
Yes, there are currently 2 hands raised.
Okay, thank you.
And it looks like we're just waiting for Dennis Roberts at this point as far as council members to join us. I see him here, so I'm going to, oh, I saw him here. All right, and it looks like Dennis Roberts has joined us now, so all the council members are present, and it's past 7 o'clock.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to call this meeting of the Urbana City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Here.
Holbrook,
Here.
Percy,
Here.
Jacobson. Jacobson,
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm not muted.
Miller,
I'm here.
Here.
Wu. Here. Mayor Marlin.
Here. Before we get started, I just wanted to let the public know that we have switched to the Zoom webinar format. This is in response to the Zoom bombing episodes that occurred several times last week. So this form of Zoom shows video of the council members, the panelists participating in the meeting, but not of other participants. Audio is still available though. So when we get to the public input and you wish to speak, Jason, raise your hand and Jason will unmute you and allow you to give you the opportunity to speak. And we apologize again for the graphic images that came through last week, and we hope this will prevent that from happening at least. It also allows for a larger number of participants. Next up is approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve.
And I'll second it.
Moved by Dennis, seconded by, is that Bill Colebrook?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any corrections?
No.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Next up is additions to the agenda. I would like to request that we move number 5, closed session, to consider the purchase or lease of real property and consider appointments to take place right after public input and before the budget presentation.
Do you need a motion, Diane?
I need a motion for that, yes.
I'll make a motion that we move item number 5, closed session, to right after public input, which is before presentation, the budget input presentation.
Second.
Moved by Mary Alice, seconded by Sharice. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that motion passes. And when that happens, we'll be leaving this Zoom meeting, going to a different Zoom meeting, and then returning to this meeting. Hopefully that all works smoothly. Next item on the agenda is public input. I'm going to ask for verbal input first tonight. We've received a lot of email, and we'll read as many as we can in the 2-hour allocation for public input. But I wanted to make sure as many people as possible could give verbal input as well, so that's on the record. We have the emails as a record. Jared, do we have Minnie Pearson? I believe wanted to provide input.
Yeah, give me just a minute here to get Minnie unmuted. I've allowed Minnie Pearson to talk.
Go ahead, Minnie, please unmute, or will you unmute him, Jason?
She should be able to unmute now. I've asked her to unmute.
Okay.
Okay. To the mayor and the members of the Urbana City Council from the Champaign ACLU and the NAACP Champaign County branch. We, the local chapter of the ACLU and the NAACP Champaign County branch, want to commend the Urbana Police Department for their response to the recent protest in Urbana. Urbana police protected the constitutional rights and the protesters rather than rioting, as other police office departments had done. Beyond that, some officers, the chief, joined the protest and took a knee in honor of the memory of George Floyd. So thank you. We also commend the mayor and city council members for taking former President Obama's pledge to reform policing. Having worked for decades on the police reform, ACLU and NAACP are heartened to see many Americans take up the issue and speak out against the racial injustices that we support, managing the public safety and reallocating funds and community needs. But right now, we must reform the police department we have. And once reforms are enacted, we expect the mayor, city council, and chief to exercise oversight to ensure they carry this out. Thank you so much. Carol?
Hi, thanks, Minnie. So specifically, we urge the Urbana Police Department to 1, adopt a use of force policy that explicitly recommends de-escalation and specifies the steps that must be taken before resorting to force. It must include concrete steps to hold officers accountable if they fail to follow the policy. 2, resolve going forward to release to the public all Urbana Police Department body and car cam footage in every incident that involves a shooting, use of a taser, or any other use of force. Many cities, including Chicago and New Orleans, have released policies. 3, NAACP and ACLU are pleased that dates and places for the 10 shared principles workshops that focus on community-centered policing have been set. We also urge the Urbana Police Department to report biannually to the public about how many officers have completed the 10 principles workshops and other de-escalation training. 4, in the use of military hardware in Urbana neighborhoods. In addition, we urge the Citizen Review Board to make use of the power it has been granted. The board has the power to serve in an advisory capacity to the police department and can be a conduit for community concerns. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Minnie now.
In order to demonstrate the seriousness of the city's response, our elected city officials must continue to hold our police department accountable and ensure they carry out the reforms they have agreed to. Both city officials and police must make a greater effort to communicate honestly with the community when the investigation takes place, especially around the issue of Aaliyah Lewis is completed. All results of the independent investigation must be shared with the Citizens Review Board, and appropriate actions must be taken at that time. The NAACP and the ACLU look forward to continuing to work with the City of Urbana and Chief Serafin on these very important reforms. By implementing the 10 principles, shared principles, and becoming more transparent and more community-centered, the Urbana Police Department could become a model for the professional and equitable policing. And a genuine reform will make it possible to reestablish trust between the police and the community, especially the community of color, which has suffered unfair treatments far too long. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to address the Urbana City Council? I see some hands.
There are some hands. Give me just a minute to move a couple people over. And looking at the top of the list here, Sarah Nixon. I'm unmuting Sarah Nixon. I've asked you to unmute, and you should be able to speak now. Sarah, I've asked you to unmute. There you are. Now you should be able to speak.
Okay. City Council, I'm speaking again because the city is continuing to ignore the people's outcry for action, and the inaction on the Aaliyah Lewis case is subjecting her to prolonged torture. The Urbana Police Department is perpetuating a culture of racism and abuse of minorities, and especially women. The Urbana Police Department and the state's attorney's office has charged her with exactly what they did to her. And this is how abuse works. This is how abusers work. They spin the narrative, they pretend to be the victim, and they accuse and vilify their victims. They launch public smear campaigns, as you have done, against their victim. The Urbana police officers publicly humiliated and denigrated an innocent woman who was traumatized. She was a traumatized bystander. You made her get on her hands and knees on the street. You ignored her distress, and when she tried to ask you a question, you attacked her, you assaulted her, arrested her, and jailed her. And now you're conspiring with the justice system to prosecute her. Yet we know that the police chief can ask Julia Reitz to drop the charges against Miss Lewis. And we are appalled that we are still calling on leadership to do this very thing. Secondly, I want to ask the city why they have hired a firm to conduct an outside review, yet not released the name of that outside firm. This secrecy is very troubling. And three, I want to respond to Mr. Lubianski's invitation for public input with regard to the Citizens or Civilians Police Review Board. We are here, we are ready to engage in conversation, but we're not being given any concrete invitation to do this at any specific time and place. And so I'm calling on the city to put this on the agenda. And as a final note, I want to note also that we need to expand this conversation to address the role that the police union is playing in obstructing progress, in obstructing the possibility of reform for everyone. involved in this fiasco. Thank you.
I see Dottie Vera Weiss.
And Dottie, you should be unmuted to where you can talk.
Okay, good evening. Mayor Marlin and City Council members, I am commenting again in response to the brutal arrest of Ms. Leah Lewis on April 10th of this year and the official law enforcement response that said the police officers' actions were A-OK. All of this is unacceptable. We expect our police officers to show respect to all community members, which they certainly didn't do on April 10th. Police are sometimes called public safety officers or even peace officers, but these actions were anything but peaceful, and they jeopardized rather than protected public safety. The plan to hire an independent consultant to investigate the situation is promising, but it must include the following steps. Number one has already passed and hasn't been met. It must involve community members in choosing the independent organization to investigate all of these issues. Number two, it must set a scope of work that involves not just the specific incident, but also issues of disrespect for others based on race, gender, economic status, and religious background. And must investigate how those attitudes interfere with the ability to truly improve public safety, and also whether current police procedures and use of force guidelines are appropriate. Third, the UPD should begin right now to review random footage of police community interactions with officers and discuss how de-escalation techniques could be implemented in order to improve outcomes. Fourth, should make a strong commitment to follow through on the recommendations, even though they may be uncomfortable, in order to truly support public safety and a peaceful community. There are several good ways to show this commitment, and you could take them now. First, to encourage that the charges against Ms. Lewis be dropped. Also, to release all the body camera footage of the incident. In addition, start work now to strengthen the Civilian Police Review Board. And finally, I believe it's inappropriate to act now on the reappointment of Police Chief Serafin. That should be postponed till you have an opportunity to evaluate his work in response to the outside investigation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And on an aside, I do hope you will provide information on the workshops, on the public workshops, including the time and date, because I have not seen or heard anything about that. Thank you very much.
Tracy Chong.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Tracy Chong. I'm resident of Urbana. First of all, I want to say what a mess last Wednesday's City Council meeting about the CPRB was. Instead of taking responsibility for the terrible conditions the CPRB is in, I was hearing excuses, blaming, incompetence, and deceit from CPRB members, city staff, and even some City Council members. We heard Human Relations Officer Vasilia Clark lying about the notary requirement being in the ordinance. We heard City Attorney James Simon give a rambling excuse for the notary requirement that just did not make sense. We heard Chief of Police for Parkland College and Council Member William Colebrook citing the section of the Police Officers' Bill of Rights that was completely irrelevant to the discussion. This problem goes beyond incompetence. It is an active and deceitful effort to create hurdles in the complaint process so that their friends and colleagues in the system don't have to be held accountable. After last meeting, I also have no confidence in Mikhail Lubinsky's leadership of the CPRB. It is just perplexing for me to hear his public comments on how the CPRB is not effective because of the ordinance constraints. It is true that the current ordinance leaves much to be desired and hope that there will be reform in the future. But the actual issue was that the board members, including Mikhail himself, were not even following the ordinance in the first place. When questioned about why the board decided to go against the ordinance and stop reviewing taser displays, Mikhail tried to explain some part of the ordinance that just does not exist. There's no excuse for this. Mikhail has been on the board since 2017. He also mentioned that the board could not give proposals or recommendations to City Council because they were not being able to meet for these few months. This again does not make sense. Members of the public have been highlighting problems and giving suggestions at CPRB meetings since 2019. My question and biggest concern is, how did things get this bad? Is there no oversight over the boards and commissions and duties of city staff? Where's the accountability? Who holds board members, city staff, our mayor, and city council members accountable? How can we move forward without addressing the problem of accountability? Thank you.
Megan?
Yes, hello. All right, this is probably going to take a little bit over the 3 minutes. So, all right, thank you. Dear Mayor Marlin and the rest of the City Council, as a person who was born into and escaped the outright bigotry of Southern Illinois, I felt a feeling of gratitude when I finally lived in Champaign-Urbana and felt as if the diversity I'd been missing in my life was finally accessible. I took Urbana how it was on the surface, progressive and friendly. As a white woman, that was mostly my naive experience, and I had never been pushed to think otherwise. But more and more in the last decade, people were capturing on film what has been happening to Black people in this country for 400 years. I was horrified, but again, I naively thought, this doesn't happen here. But then the Champaign killed Richie Turner, and nothing was done about how police respond to those in mental health crisis. And the Champaign police before that had killed Kaiwan Carrington. And what came out of it? A police review board that only sometimes meets in Urbana, being held accountable by no one but you all sitting here. And who's here to keep you accountable? Us. I will go through the next few points as quickly as possible because for some reason the community gets 3 to 5 minutes to educate you, and you all get 20 minutes to explain why you are or you are not personally racist, like last week. Anyway, the CPRB, in the first place, the Civilian Police Review Board is a weak Band-Aid, and it is almost a laughable process. To issue a complaint against the police takes a huge amount of courage, resources, and time. So what is a Black person to do? Take my friend, for example, from last Sunday's protest. You expect this biracial woman who was targeted and mistreated by the police, held in jail for 48 hours without bond, in dangerous, questionably illegal conditions, now reeling and dealing with trauma and court preparations. You now expect her and want her to now start a process actively against the abusers? According to the CPRB guidelines, they have 45 days to issue a complaint from the day of the incident. Someone else could complain on their behalf, but an eyewitness is supposedly the only alternative. The CPRB then hands it over to the chief of police to issue an internal affairs investigation into their own workplace. If the investigation comes back saying there's nothing to investigate, the victim then could appeal the decision and attempt to keep fighting the system that is meant to break humans down. If the appeal is found unsustained by the CPRB, the board and the chief of police meet to discuss and forward the findings to you, Mayor Marlin. Apparently you get final say if they make it this far in the complaint process at all. And why would you, someone who was endorsed by the Urbana Fraternal Order of Police and quite public about it, want to make the police appear as they truly are? They are perpetrators of a racist, militant system that you are also culpable for, Mayor Marlin. And so are you, every single one of you council members who aren't constantly pressuring her to hold an emergency meeting to reevaluate this proposed budget. And don't tell me there isn't time or there isn't money. Use the reserves in the budget for 2020 to facilitate these emergency meetings, town hall discussions until there's agreed upon consensus. Are you serious with this 2021 budget? 30% of the city's money is going to the police force? After you closed down the Urbana Civic Center, citing it would save almost $600,000. Then you turned around, gave half of that back to the police, demanding they be allowed to be present in the schools with our children. An SRO officer arrested my friend last Sunday, dragged her around while trying to find a car to put her in, and is now pressing that she be charged with aggravated assault to a peace officer with a bond that was set at $50,000. $5,000 to get my friend out of jail during COVID-19 on the first of the month. But her mom and I did it because we are not going to let the system abuse her, especially when she is presumed innocent until after the trial has concluded, weeks or months into the future. A week later, 2 days ago, a man her same age was arrested for aggravated assault to a peace officer, failure to reduce speed, a DUI, and resisting arrest. He was put in the same jail in Urbana. His bond was set at $5,000, $500 to get him out. Wonder what the difference was. Can you guess? He was white. We're not going to take this anymore. This ends now and this ends here. My demands, in no particular order, along with many voices in the community that you need to stop ignoring. We want the charges against Aaliyah Lewis dropped. We want you to block the reappointment of Chief Seraphin right now and apologize for the city's apparent handling of this case. We want you to call for all charges to be dropped against anyone arrested 2 Sundays ago when our city released militarized riot police against our own community members at Marketplace Mall, most of whom did not break or steal anything. And if they had, you cannot tell a group of people that have been killed, oppressed, enslaved, experienced things that most of you and I will never know, the generational trauma and broken family, the results of that has created. You can't tell them how to feel, how to be. You know what's violent? Not a group of young Black folks protesting in a Burger King parking lot. It is you, the white adults, who over and over again think you can decide who is worthy of life and liberty in this country, in this town, in our own backyard, because you feel like the police keep you safe, or at the very least, your privilege. You need to reallocate the cannabis excise tax revenue to grant money for organizations like HBN Neighborhood Transformation or other community development projects, not back to the police in a special revenue fund. Cannabis has a long policed and racially charged part in history. It would have never been criminalized in the first place if segregation had been kept out of legislation. Anyone who doesn't know this history has no business deciding where that money goes. You need to begin the process of discussing how Champaign-Urbana can defund our police and divert money to programs that create safer conditions for everyone in our community. Until that happens, I also urge the City Council to enact immediate legislation that will hold the police accountable and to overturn policies that allow police to engage in unlawful behavior with impunity. People are marching in the streets that you are posing with for photo ops because they know that these actions that I proposed will result in a healthier, more just society. I implore you to please listen to the needs of your constituents and take immediate action to address these concerns. We can say Black Lives Matter all we want, but as a community, we must show that Black Lives Matter. And as a capitalist society, we must spend our money like Black Lives Matter. Either listen to these demands or get voted out next year. We will remember where you stood on this issue. Thank you for your time.
Next up is Christopher.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Christopher Hansen. I've lived in Urbana for almost 20 years now. Last week, I listened to the discussion about the CPRB, and I heard Bill Brown ask for the written standards for orientation and education for CPRB members. This is something that's supposed to be created by the HRO. I tried to find those documents myself several weeks ago, and the answer is that they don't exist because in the 13 years since CPRB's founding, in addition to violating the CPRB ordinance in a number of other ways, Cecilia Clark never created those documents. The discussion last week about the notary requirement for police complaints was a sight to behold. The characters in your play are straining so hard to deny accountability that they are tripping over each other's lies. Diane Marlin said she discussed the notary requirement with Scott Dossett for over an hour. Carol Mitten said she discussed it at length with City Attorney James Simon. Then James Simon claimed he wasn't very familiar with the Urbana CPRB, which I'm having trouble understanding because he had apparently just been discussing it with Carol Mitten. The CPRB has been a focus of discussion for several months now, and James Simon has personally sent me multiple letters in regards to the CPRB over the past few months. Then we heard both James Simon and Cecilia Clark directly lie to the City Council about there being a notary requirement in the ordinance. This is absolutely wrong. No such requirement exists. It was simply invented by city staff and the Urbana Police Department as a tool for denying residents access to the CPRB. The fact that this ridiculous barrier, obviously invented to impede and intimidate residents from submitting police complaints, the fact that this is so staunchly defended by city staff just shows the stubbornness of the city to move in a direction of more accountability. The most notable part of Wednesday's discussion was the unspoken part. No effort was made to determine how it was possible that the CPRB went off the tracks for so many years and why city staff members weren't doing their jobs. Where is the personal accountability and responsibility in this discussion? I don't think you should appoint Bryant Seraphin or Vasilia Clark back to their positions as police chief and human relations officer. Seraphin hasn't made a single utterance to recognize problems with policing, and he refuses to give any acknowledgement in regards to improving the civilian review process. Vasilia Clark has been negligent in her job for at least the past several years, and last week we saw her lie to council about the CPRB ordinance. I also think the city of Urbana needs to find a new city attorney. James Simon has no moral integrity and clearly stands against the interests of the residents of Urbana. To have a city attorney who is going to sit in public meetings and lie to the council and lie to the public is just wrong. Let's get rid of these people. Let's hire people who actually have integrity. Thank you.
Next up is Tomas.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. First, I want to add my support to the messages of those who have spoken before me. I will not belabor their points or repeat what they have said. They have done an excellent job of presenting those to you. Instead, I wish to address the issue of police reform and the concept that police reform can occur without the total abolition of the current police force. I've been a chef at Confusion, Timponi's, the Champagne Country Club, Big Grove Tavern, and Biaggi's. Over the course of the past 12 years, I have fed thousands of you. I've fed thousands of citizens in this community, guests in our community. I've interacted with them for years of my life. But one of the most important jobs of a chef is to maintain the work culture of a kitchen. A kitchen is a chaotic and terrifying place to anyone who has never been in it. And in order to maintain that culture, we spend a lot of our time and effort worrying about bad apples. I wish to share with you a thought experiment we often talk about in the restaurant industry. It's called the experiment of 5 monkeys. And pardon me for 1 second. Can you please wait? Can you please wait? Can you please turn around? Thank you. I'm very sorry. The way this thought experiment works is a researcher puts 5 monkeys in a cage. There's a bunch of bananas hanging from a string, a ladder which can access those bananas. One monkey goes up and tries to pick the bananas. In the process, the researchers spray them with cold water. The next monkey attempts the same. They do the same. At this point, the researcher begins to replace the monkeys with monkeys who have never been in the cage before. They don't spray them anymore. But the monkeys that had been sprayed know that if he goes up there and tries to grab the bananas, they will all get sprayed. As a result, they forcibly hold him back. As you continue this process, replacing the monkeys, eventually you end up with a cage of monkeys where there are no monkeys who have ever been sprayed by cold water. Yet, every single one will fight tooth and nail to keep any of them from going up that ladder. Why? Because of toxic culture. This is why it does not work to just replace bad apples. In the same way, you can't just replace one bad cook in the kitchen. When the toxic culture becomes too bad, the only solution is to fire everyone and rehire from the ground up. If you doubt this, talk to Scott Glassman, the owner of Crane Alley, and ask him what he did when his entire staff was stealing from him. He didn't go through and pick out the managers who were responsible. My correction, it was the managers, not the entire staff. He closed the doors, fired his entire staff, and rehired them. Crane Alley is now probably many of your favorite restaurants. I know you city council members go and eat there all the time. That is why we cannot just retrain or reform existing police. The only solution is abolition all the way from the top to the bottom of the command chain. Complete rehiring. Thank you very much for your time.
Amina Payne.
Amina, you should be unmuted now.
Hi there, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for having me today. Excuse me, I'm a former Urbana High School student and I currently live in Australia. So I'm dialing in this morning to make your evening session. Now, I'm also a tertiary educator, so I teach adult learners. And I'm writing to you today to harness your support for the removal of police within Urbana Middle School and Urbana High School. I graduated in 2007, and it saddens me that UMS and UHS have spent and have committed to spending over $100,000 as a startup cost, plus over $300,000 per year to fund police presence, without any clear evidence that this presence returns any value. Now, we must reconsider the presence of SROs in our school. Now, I'm not stating that they are not meeting their required outputs. I'm not stating that they're not doing their job. However, we know that the mere presence of police in schools serves to reinforce and accelerate the school to prison pipeline. And this is borne out by data. Now, according to data released by the U.S. Department of Education's Civil Rights Data Collection for the 2015 and 2016 academic year, Black students represented 15% of enrollment in public schools across the country. Yet, they account for 31% of students who are referred to law enforcement or arrested. Now, I'm looking to harness your support to bring about this reconsideration. I've already spoken with Urbana School Board member Peggy Patton, who supports this effort and has shared with me that she hopes to revisit this issue again in the fall, especially as the reality of our budget shortfall, or of the Urbana budget shortfall, needs to be addressed. Now, it would be wonderful to continue this conversation, and I do plan to reach out to key stakeholders and continue to harness support. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you. Emily Rodriguez.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay?
Could you speak up a bit?
Okay, great, I see some nodding. Great, so I serve as Champaign's Citizen Police Review Subcommittee Chair. In my comments, I want to just briefly touch on two corrections that I already emailed about, and then I also wanted to highlight some of the recommendations for changes to Urbana's CPRB ordinance that the Chair Lubanski made. So in my email to the council, I affirmed that Champaign's complaint process does not require notarization and provided some clarification on Urbana's bargaining agreement with UPD. So I won't rehash this. It's also been touched on in some previous comments. But I did want to spend my time talking about recommendations. I want to make this very, very clear. If the City Council wants a functioning Citizen Police Review Board, then the council must submit changes to the ordinance that outlines the board's responsibilities. So I strongly support CPRB Chair Lubanski's 3 changes that he seeks to make to the ordinance, which he outlined in his public comments weeks ago. These were subpoena power, the ability to review all complaints, not just appeals, and then finally to remove the notarization requirement from the complaint submission process. I support these changes and Champagne's review process has operated under each of these since our inception. Each are crucial to accomplishing our mission. I also want to note 4 additional changes that have kind of flown under the radar. Each has been practiced by our review board since 2016. First, the CPRB should review all uses of force, not just tasers. This is similar to what our use of force board reviews. Second, the council should reconsider the requirement for service on the CPRB. Specifically, the council should strike language in the ordinance that prohibits anyone with a criminal felony conviction or plea from serving on the CPRB. This is entirely counterproductive to the mission of the review board. In fact, experience with the criminal justice system are crucial voices. They are an asset to reviewing a complaint. Next, the council should allow the CPRB to elect their own leadership. Currently, the language in the ordinance requires the mayor designate the chair and a vice chair of the board, and also allows the mayor to remove any board member. This requirement gives the mayor too much power over the board, who also has little knowledge of the inner workings of that board. And finally, the council should raise the standards for CPRB training material. This has been noted before, so I won't belabor the point. But members should be briefed on the language of the ordinance, the standards, the police policy, and also some points on how to work with city staff. This seems to be where much of the ball has been dropped in not following the ordinance thus far. And so these 4 would, again, have been in practice in Champaign for some time and would allow for a fully competent and functioning review board. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to address the council? Okay. We have received many emails. We have up to 2 hours for public comment. I wanted to make sure I read into the record who has submitted emails. The council has read them, and then we'll read as many as we can. So we've received messages from Abby Schrantz, Abby Fields, Adrian Wong, Ellen Romero, Alexandra Harmon, Threat, Alicia Feroza, Alam, Allison Boyaris, Allison O'Dwyer, Amina Malik, Amy Graff, Amy Hassinger, Andrea Miller, Anna Fetters, Annie Hooper, Anshu Dewan, Austin Hoffman, Beata Krupa, Benjamin Stone, Bijal Patel, Brian Dunn, Brian Vera Weiss, Bronwyn Kane, Kara Sarver, Carol Inskeep, Charles Strelo, Christina Bolo, Christina Parks, Christine Janik, Claudia Berdugo, Daniel Lakemacher, Danielle Chenoweth, Danielle McFarland, Debbie Sperry, Don Kiefer, Drew McGregor, Elliot Schultz, Elena Ahmed, Elizabeth Matsushita, Elizabeth Simpson, Emily Matthews, Emily Curlin, Emily McCown, Emma looks like Schmielewski, Gabby Cooper, Gabrielle Rolbluski, Garija Bodanker, Grace Park, Hamed Kadiani, Hana Ahmed Khan, Hugh Bowman, Jamie Davis, Jamie Keener, Jan Kalmar, Janet Elaine Guthrie, Jeffrey Putney, Jesse Rudell, Jiming Chen, John Hayes, Joshua David Cisneros, Julia Francesca Santos, Julia Lang, Juliet Larkin Gilmore, Casey Castanaga, Kai Shinbro, Karen Linder, Catherine Majewski, Catherine Oberdeck, Kay Kirkpatrick, Kelsey Langley, Kevin Trainer, Corin Langford, Laura Job, Laurel Noblette, Lila Leopold, Lily Smith, Logan Middleton, Marcy Adelson Schaefer, Marissa Danielle Sbrili, Mark Jaeger, Maria Burke, Matt Murray, Matt Torino, Maya Goulard, Megan Miracle, Michael Vignola, Monica Ames, Munib Ansari, Owen McDonald, Preston James, Ramona Montez, Ramya Gandhi, Rebecca Obachowski, River Brown, Ron Kester, Samiksha Gupta, Sarah McAvoy, Sarah Nixon, Sarah Roper, Sharon Irish, Sharon Monday, Sophie Mine, Tanya Josek, Tatiana Amin, Ammons, Todd Rent, Thomas Delgado, Travis Blitzhoser, Trish Marasigan, Yasmi Ragab, Zev Alexander, Zoe, what? There may have been a few more that came in right before the meeting started, and we'll pull that list together as well. Hang on a second. I'll start to read emails. This one is from Carol Ammons, Urbana City Council members. In the face of a national uprising, Urbana has a responsibility to stand for the people. The April 10th incident in Urbana was egregious. While responding to a domestic violence call, Aaliyah Lewis sustained physical injuries and psychological trauma at the hands of Urbana police. Make no mistake, the assault could have ended differently. She could have suffocated under the weight of police officers straddled across her body. She could have had permanent damage from the punch to the face or knee to the side. The profoundly disappointing part of this incident and so many others is acceptance by the majority of elected officials of the brutal treatment of its citizens, largely African American citizens. The nation's collective condemnation of police violence against the Black community represents a watershed moment at the national level and right here at home. The time for systemic change to policing in this country is now. We need coordinated federal, state, and local reforms that impose accountability on policing. When local law enforcement agencies receive federal funding, they must be made to comply with federal civil rights laws. We can no longer perpetuate a system that funds militarizing the police over community programs. I'm requesting that the City Council not only delay the appointment of Chief of Police for the City of Urbana, and that the City Council reframes what it wants policing to look like in the wake of civil unrest. Marching and demonstrating is only one half of the task. Symbols of solidarity are hollow without taking action to change the system. As a resident and mother of African American sons, I live with the never-ending fear that my children will meet the fate so many others have. The leadership in this city is going to chant Black Lives Matter. They must take the actions to make it true. Input from Zev Alexander. Hello, Mr. Brown and Urbana City Council. My name is Zev Alexander. I recently purchased a home in Ward 4. I'm writing to voice my opposition to the reappointment of Chief Seraphin as Police Chief on Monday. Attending protests and speaking out against the murder of George Floyd rings hollow when we have seen no investigation into the case of Aaliyah Lewis, whose rights to due process were clearly violated on April 10th. No matter the details of that night, I want a police chief who's dedicated to accountability, transparency, humility, and above all, honesty. I love Urbana, and I'm dedicated to living here for a long time. I know we can do better as a community. It's time to drop the charges against Aaliyah Lewis, open a robust third-party investigation into the incident, and seriously revitalize our broken civilian review board. The next one is from LEW, Urbana City Council. Given the problematic actions of the chief regarding Ms. Lewis, namely claiming she sustained no injuries, putting her on public trial without a defense, and violating her Fifth Amendment rights, it would be unseemly to go ahead on a reappointment vote. The current investigation with the Citizens Review Board should be taken seriously, and there should be repercussions for bad actions on the part of the police. Delay or decline the reappointment of Chief Seraphin. Continue to prove to your community that you take police accountability seriously. That's Gabrielle Robluski. Amy Grave. Let's see. Oops. Sorry, I lost my place here. Well, I'll pick up with that one hopefully later. Anna Fetters, members of the Urbana City Council. My name is Anna Fetters. I've been an Urbana resident for 5 years. In this time when our nation is experiencing a long overdue reawakening regarding the deadly impact of persistent racial injustice against Black human beings following the recent murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, it is imperative that you as City Council members do all in your power to work for racial justice here in Urbana. The path to justice begins by addressing past instances of racial injustice. This April, Urbana resident Aaliyah Lewis was assaulted by Urbana police officers and now faces unjust charges. I write to ask you on the Urbana City Council to do all in your power to have the charges against Ms. Lewis dropped and the officers responsible held accountable for their actions. The path to reform continues by creating a functional system of accountability between the Urbana Police Department and community members. The existing Civilian Police Review Board places too many barriers to requesting and implementing investigations and needs substantial reform. Specifically, this looks like 1, removing the requirement for notarized documents, 2, extending the complaint submission deadline beyond 45 days, 3, eliminating the requirement that a complainant must personally witness the incident for which they're requesting review, 4, review the original form of the CPRB ordinance as proposed in 2007 and strengthen the current ordinance by amending it with key measures that were eliminated from the original proposed ordinance. Finally, these changes may require new leadership for the Urbana Police Department. The Urbana City Council should defer reappointing Chief Serafin until it becomes clear whether he can come on board with needed reforms. The moment for addressing systemic racial injustice is long overdue in this nation and community. You on the City Council have the power to take concrete action to address past injustice and help move our community towards a more just and united future. Please don't delay in addressing these concerns listed here, as well as those shared by so many others in the community. Carol Inskeep writes, my name is Carol Inskeep. I'm a longtime resident of Urbana. I hope my elected representatives, my mayor and city council are listening to the heartfelt and outraged protests that are rocking the world right now. We are calling for transformation of policing as usual to a more humane and just approach to public safety. I do not think that Chief Serafin's reappointment is consistent with that vision. I watched Chief Serafin's presentation to the City Council a few weeks ago. I wanted to hear him hold his officers accountable to the highest professional standards. I wanted to see his commitment to de-escalation and to a skilled response when someone is in crisis. Instead, I saw a defensive and minimizing presentation that violated the privacy of the person who was punched by and mocked by the officers. Other communities around the country are realizing we can and must do better. I hope our council and mayor will reject the chief's reappointment. Further, I hope we'll begin to shift money from policing to programs that address poverty, substance abuse, mental health, and unemployment. Emily Svensson, dear Urbana City Council members, as an Urbana resident, I'm extremely concerned about holding our local police force accountable for their actions. As you know, there's a tremendous groundswell in the US right now to look critically at our law enforcement agencies and their practices, especially as they pertain to our Black and brown neighbors. Our own police department has a very recent incident that's of great concern, the recent and brutal arrest of Ms. Lewis. To that end, I urge you to do 2 things. Do not reappoint Chief Serafin. Show our community that you are committed to change and new leadership in our police force. Incidents of excessive force are not tolerated here in Urbana. And it starts with showing our lack of confidence in police leadership. Chief Serafin has also, to my knowledge, done nothing to publicly address what's going on in the country, in contrast to his Champaign counterpart, Anthony Cobb. This would be an opportunity for police chief to show leadership and empathy, support for the Black Lives Matter movement. We need a police chief that's a visionary, someone willing to think about law enforcement in a new way. Urbana is a community that would support that. We have the opportunity to blaze a trail. We just need someone that can lead us forward. It would be great to have a person of color in that role. When you go to the UPD website and look at the police staff page, all of the images are of white men. Not a good look for us right now. Encourage the UPD to drop charges against Ms. Lewis, or at least issue a statement on her behalf acknowledging excessive use of force on a citizen in our town if the improper treatment occurred outside their jurisdiction. Thank you for your attention. Let's ride this wave of change. I think it will make Urbana a stronger, better community. Megan Miracle. Dear council members, I'm writing to voice my concern over reappointing Chief Serafin. I urge the council to decline the appointment, especially in the face of the investigation of the inappropriate use of force against Aaliyah Lewis. Serafin violated Lewis's Fifth Amendment rights when he put her on public trial with no defense. The City Council has a responsibility to make decisions that are in the best interest of all Urbana residents, but has lately privileged police narratives and illusions of public safety over the actual experiences of community members. Voting against the reappointment, initiating a substantive and independent investigation of Lewis's assault, and making the Citizen Police Review Board a meaningful oversight would ensure that resident voices are being heard. I support these calls to action, urge the City Council to demonstrate they are taking the events of April 10th seriously, truly hearing the calls that have been repeated by protesters and activists in our community. Emily Matthews, defund the police and start with not reappointing Chief Serafin to the current context of investigation into the actions police took against Aaliyah Lewis. I urge you to not reappoint Chief Serafin, at least until the investigation returns findings. Chief Serafin's action in Ms. Lewis's case are clearly biased. I return to what I've written last week: drop all charges against Aaliyah Lewis, initiate a truly meaningful and independent investigation, put the officers who beat Ms. Lewis on leave pending the investigation, make the CPRB a meaningful oversight and comply with its ordinance. Minneapolis has issued historic decision to defund the police. This is a tipping point in our society. I urge you to start investigating what it would mean to reallocate resources to public health, mental health, other community-focused strategies. Urbana is well known for being unwelcoming to Black folks. Use your power to change that. Additionally, I want to share a podcast Throughline from NPR, which discusses the history of policing in America, which is very much tied to our history of slavery. Please take some time to educate yourselves. It is the duty of those in power. This is Lily Smith. My name is Lillian Smith and my family lives in Urbana, Illinois. I'm extremely concerned with the City of Urbana's investment in the police department at the expense of critical youth education and health services. I'm therefore writing to demand that the City Council vote to reapportion funds currently allocated to the police department to instead support evidence-based programs and services that, unlike increased police presence, promote the well-being of our citizens and reduce crime. It is morally reprehensible to dedicate so many resources to police while citizens struggle to afford basic necessities and many more lack access to essential services, including childcare, detox centers, and necessary mental health resources. We could be empowering communities by educating at trauma resiliency, supporting local housing and justice accessibility efforts, designating community counselors to address root causes of the crimes we police. Although through appropriate fund allocation, we may be able to break established cycles of poverty, crime, and addiction that affect every member of our community. I also urge the City Council to enact legislation that will hold the police accountable, to overturn policies that allow police to engage in unlawful behavior with impunity. People are marching in the streets because they know that these actions will result in a healthier, more just society. I implore you to please listen to the needs of your constituents and take immediate action to address our concerns. We can say Black Lives Matter all we want, but as a community, we must show that Black Lives Matter, and as a capitalist society, we must spend like Black Lives Matter. Sharon Irish. Dear City Council members and Mayor Marlin, I appreciate your hard work. The intense developments locally and globally in the past 2 weeks demand our thoughtful reflection and ongoing response. I write with several suggestions. I will spare you the background unless you want more. I believe we need more time before reappointing Chief Serafin, time for the outside investigation into Aaliyah Lewis's arrest to be completed, time to planfully decide what stipulations should be in place for the UPD for the future. I ask you delay the appointment. At the very least, Urbana needs to sign the 10 shared principles between law enforcement and communities the NAACP has put forward. Apologies if this has occurred and I don't know about it. The Obama Foundation has provided a mayor's pledge that I believe should be signed and then acted upon as well. My Brother's Keeper Alliance asked city officials to commit to the following actions, which are just a start. Review your police use of force policies. Engage your communities by including a diverse range of input, experiences, and stories in your review. Report the findings of your review to your community and seek feedback. Reform your community's police use of force policies. Many of you have been working on these issues for a long time, and it's a long-term commitment. I believe our priorities should be spending on community health, education, and affordable housing, and to withdraw participation in police militarization programs. Thank you for your consideration. And there's a second part to this. Apologies for the second email. Cope Compton just shared this info from Vasilia Clark. It seems I am misinformed about my suggestion number 1. The chief's appointment is essentially at will, which means that at any point the chief's appointment can be ended. A 1-year appointment is in no way implies that the chief is guaranteed his position for that time. If in 3 weeks a report came back indicating behavior against the good of the city, the chief could be terminated. The appointments, which I'll explain later about how these appointments work. We're all struggling to figure out accurate information. I still believe we must move forward toward limiting police power and rethinking public safety. Debbie Sperry, to the Urbana Council. I have reviewed with horror the incident involving the Urbana police and citizen Aaliyah Lewis. This incident clearly involved the use of excessive force toward and restraint of this young Black woman by several white male police officers. Ms. Lewis was already handcuffed when the police officers beat her, and they continued to restrain her after she was lying on the ground face down and not resisting. This incident parallels far too closely the sickening brutalization and murder of Black man George Floyd by white male police officers in Minneapolis. Yet I understand the Urbana Police Chief Serafin's investigation of this incident found no wrongdoing. The investigation was entirely inadequate and inappropriate as it was not conducted by an outside body, unbiased outside body. Further, given that the Chief Serafin doesn't see the clear wrongdoing captured on the video, I insist he not be reappointed to his position. As a resident of this community, I cannot feel safe until all members of our community are safe. As such, I demand that you take sweeping action to ensure no further violence toward the Black members of our community by our police. I stand in solidarity with my faith community, professional colleagues, and peaceful protesters who demand justice and safety for the Black members of our community. No justice, no peace. Drew McGregor. Support for Bryant Serafin. I am writing to you today in support of retaining Bryant Serafin as the Chief of Police. I have worked with Bryant 11 years, developing youth in service and leadership. I have seen him go out of his way to assist young people who are underrepresented or who lack a deep support network. I have known him to be kind, caring, and unbiased toward all youth. Clearly, Urbana and all of America must make changes. We need to come together and better understand our problems and divisions so we can move forward. Urbana needs someone who knows the community and knows how to lead with understanding and compassion. Bryant is a valuable resource and deserves a chance to help Urbana create a better environment. Maya Goulard, dear Councilman Brown, there are moments in time when great leaps must be taken. For decades since the Civil Rights Act, we have seen that the disparities were and are still blatant in our system. My whole lifetime, I have witnessed racism even in our progressive community. My high school years, Urbana High School class of '92, we saw rules put in place about hats blamed on gang violence. Rules about hats when these youth, my classmates and friends, were needing real support. As an adult, I have seen the prison system grow and the police force become more and more militarized. A tank, for crying out loud. I have witnessed the blatant systemic racism where a Black man accused of using a fake $20 bill can be forcefully detained and arrested, while a white man who callously murdered someone is not arrested until there's an airtight case. We constantly hear about police internal reviews, paid leaves of absence, shooting, and self-defense. This is not a problem only in other places. Our community has a track record of all these issues. A young man the same age as my oldest daughter was killed at age 15, Kiwan. Constantly, people of color are mistreated by our police. Enough is enough. It's time for change, and not some small fig leaf of 10% cuts. We need big changes. The world is behind this. I call on you as my voice in the local process to hold off on any votes of budget passing and the renewal of the contract. We need to give the community time to get involved and come up with real solutions. Defund our police, replacing it with socially responsible answers. Homelessness, addiction, abuse, and more do not need people with guns using force to solve the problem. Indeed, they are exacerbating it. We teach our children that violence is not the answer, then use our tax dollars to use violence to attempt to solve every problem in our community. As a community member who has always cared but felt like change was never going to come, I am finally seeing opportunity. I look forward to working with you and others in our community to set up community-based programs that look at healing our community instead of dividing it. Melinda Carr, which is a statement of public input from the Ministerial Alliance of Champaign, Urbana, and Vicinity. As pastors, elders, ministers, evangelists, and other clergy, we stand in unity with our community, state, and nation, continuing our commitment to advocate against racial injustice. A public outcry is heard as we once again grieve over the loss of a Black life that mattered, George Floyd in Minnesota. Countless other Black lives, including Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Eric Gardner, and Michael Brown, have been lost due to excessive force or cruel and unusual punishment leading to death caused by a police officer or by a citizen with racial prejudice. We acknowledge the very courageous acts of local individuals of all races in Champaign-Urbana who have stepped up to serve as watchdogs, providing videos to the public, speaking out during public input related to the arrest of Aaliyah Lewis on April 10th, and exposing critical areas of misconduct, violations, and lack of oversight within the City of Urbana, Urbana Police Department, Civilian Police Review Board. In addition, we acknowledge and support recent efforts of the NAACP and other community organizations to hold the City of Urbana and Urbana Police Department accountable for excessive use of force leading up to the arrest of Aaliyah Lewis on April 10th. The NAACP has called for an internal affairs investigation in this case and is holding the Urbana Police Department accountable in adopting the 10 shared principles of cooperation with the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police and the police departments across the state, with the purpose to build relationships and trust between both the police and the Black community. The community has not been silent on the issue of injustice. In 2014, more than a dozen local organizations, including the CU Citizens for Peace and Justice and the Ministerial Alliance, publicly denounced the use of military-style assault rifles, insisted that such weapons should not be used against minors, especially in schools, peaceful protesters, and in serving routine warrants and arrests. We also ask that clear policies be developed on their usage. In 2015, in collaboration with the CU Citizens for Peace and Justice and other community support, we submitted vital feedback to the Urbana IDOT Traffic Stop Data Task Force, including asking officials to clearly identify criteria for determining when police officers are abusing their authority against citizens, rights of citizens to be free from unlawful search, seizure, or harassment by police officers, putting in place safeguards to avoid the fear of reprisal when filing complaints, and also recognizing the blue code of silence that exists within police departments among police officers and putting in place a democratically elected, not appointed civilian police review board that will be effective in identifying unjust practices. This board should have the authority to review all cases, not just upon appeal and with subpoena power. The same public outcry is here again today. We ask you please listen, be very courageous, and take immediate action to stand against racial injustices in our community by making these much needed and long sought changes. This is the executive board and members of the Ministerial Alliance of Champaign, Urbana, and Vicinity. Thank you. This is Aman Khan, commit to reallocate funds for social equity. Hello, my name is Aman. I'm a resident of Streamwood, Illinois. I'm extremely concerned with the City of Urbana's investment in the police department. as a means of keeping our community safe and healthy. I'm therefore writing to demand the City Council vote to reapportion funds currently allocated to the police department to instead support programs that promote the well-being of our citizens and hold each other accountable in keeping our community safe. It's morally reprehensible to dedicate so many resources to police while citizens struggle to afford basic necessities and many more lack access to essential services. We could be better taking care of our community by educating on trauma resiliency. I implore you to please listen to the needs of your constituents, take immediate action to address our concerns. We can say Black Lives Matter all we want, but as a community, we must show that Black Lives Matter, and as a society currently burdened by capitalism, we must spend like Black Lives Matter. Ramya Gandhi. Hello, I hope this email finds you in good health. My name is Ramya Gandhi. I'm a resident of, that's Bartlett, Illinois. I'm going to stick to Urbana right now. My name is Ramona Montez. I'm a resident of Champaign, Illinois. I'm extremely concerned with the City of Urbana's investment in the police department at the expense of critical youth education and health services. I'm writing to demand that the City Council vote to reapportion funds currently allocated to the police department to support evidence-based programs and services that, unlike increased police presence, promote the well-being of our citizens and reduce crime. It's morally reprehensible to dedicate so many resources to police while citizens struggle to afford basic necessities, and many more lack access to essential services, including childcare, detox centers, and necessary mental health resources. We could be empowering communities by educating on trauma resiliency, supporting local housing, and justice accessibility efforts. Designating community counselors to address root causes of the crimes we police. Through appropriate fund allocation, we may be able to break established cycles of poverty, crime, and addiction. I also urge the City Council to enact legislation that will hold the police accountable, overturn policies that allow police to engage in unlawful behavior with impunity. People are marching in the streets because they know that these actions will result in a healthier, more just society. I implore you to please listen to the needs of your constituent, take immediate action. We can say Black Lives Matter all we want, but as a community, we must show that Black Lives Matter, and as a capitalist society, we must spend like Black Lives Matter. Patricia Ege. This is a letter concerning the Urbana Police Department from Cunningham Children's Home. Good afternoon. We, Marlon Livingston, CEO, and Pat Ege, Vice President of Programs, have worked at Cunningham Children's Home for several decades. As administrator at Cunningham, our experiences with UPD has been predominantly positive, having campus-based programming and particularly congregate care, as well as community-based programs. Cunningham staff need to contact the police for safety and support. We have had trespassers, some of whom had serious intent to cause harm. Our clients, who mostly due to trauma-related pain-based behaviors, become aggressive, suicidal, runaway, and present with other safety issues which require us to work closely with the police. UPD has helped us locate and return our youth after elopements, including checking empty houses, contacting those who harbor our clients. Many times, individual officers go above and beyond by positively engaging our youth towards successful outcomes. This past year, an officer made an agreement with one of our youth to play her in basketball if she didn't run for a period of time. After successfully staying around, that one-on-one matchup happened at our new building, with our youth winning. With our longevity, we have worked closely with a handful of officers over the year, including Chief Bryant Seraphin as an officer, a lieutenant, and a deputy chief. He has been highly approachable even when situations did not go as we had hoped. He responded consistently and quickly to our calls and with thorough follow-up about what he found. He has met with us in person, occasionally invites our directors to attend shift meetings with officers to share new regulations or concerns. Over the past few years, he and other UPD staff have attended several Cunningham events, including a trauma-informed training at our agency. In Champaign County, through the Coalition and other efforts, our community is positioned to take strong and effective actions to address social injustices, which may include changing policies, procedures, and responses to make systemic changes. Based on our experiences, we believe that the UPD and Chief Seraphin have the strength and willingness to make positive contributions to these efforts. Mrs. Marlon Livingston, President and CEO of Cunningham Children's Home. Lavetta Ash Simpson. Hello, Mayor Marlin. I'm writing you today to express my personal and professional opinion about Chief Bryant Seraphin to continue in his current position as Chief of Urbana. I have known Bryant for over 10 years in my professional position as District Director of Prairie Lands Council Boy Scouts of America here in Champaign, and as a dad, scout leader, and professional officer in the city of Urbana. I have known Bryant to be fair and just man who lives his life by the scout law. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent, and scout oath on a daily basis. I do believe that if Chief Seraphin was wrong in a situation, he would do whatever it takes to make it right within the guidelines of the law and be open to hear the information coming from both sides before making a decision. Currently, we are all living in a time of major shift and change in America and the world that have shown systematic racism manifested too long and not treating all of its citizens with respect and justice from the same playbook in police departments across the country. Yes, some chiefs need to go because their mind and heart are glued to a silent blue code of honor. No one is perfect, but there are those who at least have the heart to want to be a part of the solution of change and not the problem. And I believe that Chief Seraphin has the heart and attitude to want to help make new policies and procedures for change that come into fruition for all of America, but especially those impacted right here in our communities. This is Kay Kirkpatrick. Dear City Council, I hope you've had time to really think about how often police officers use excessive force in recent weeks, and I hope you'll now seriously consider removing the potential for unnecessary violence from our system. Please fund helpers, mediators, and safe people in public instead of militarized police. Alan Romero. My name is Alan Romero, and I'm an Urbana citizen that's concerned about tonight's reappointment of Police Chief Bryant Seraphin. As a result of protest actions locally and nationwide, I have recently begun educating myself on local issues relating to policing. I've heard of the Leah Lewis case and serious concerns about the chief's ability to serve. I've listed my concerns according to my own brief research. Whether or not justice is served by an internal investigation process. Are internal investigation policies made available to the public? How many complaints have been made using the complaint process in place? How many complaints have been dismissed versus investigated? What level of public oversight exists, if any, outside of the CPRB? The manner in which complaints are tracked and shared between sworn and non-sworn investigators. Does the city have any data management system? To summarize, I'm concerned that the process in place only serves to sweep complaints under the rug. I want to know how you know whether or not the complaint process is working. Charles Strelo. My name is Charles Strelo. I'm a resident of Urbana, Illinois. I'm extremely concerned with the city of Urbana's investment in the police department at the expense of critical youth, education, and health services. I'm therefore writing to demand that the city council vote to reapportion funds currently allocated to the police department to instead support evidence-based programs and services that, unlike increased police presence, promote the well-being of our citizens and reduce crime. It is morally reprehensible to dedicate so many resources to police while citizens struggle to afford basic necessities. We could be empowering communities by educating on trauma resiliency, supporting local housing and justice accessibility, designating community counselors to address root causes. Through appropriate fund allocation, we may be able to break established cycles of poverty, crime, and addiction that affect every member of our community. I also urge the City Council to enact legislation that will hold the police accountable and to overturn policies that allow police to engage in unlawful behavior with impunity. People are marching in the streets because they know that those actions will result in a healthier, more just society. I implore you to please listen to the needs of your constituents and take immediate action to address our concerns. We can say Black Lives Matter all we want, but as a community, we must show that Black Lives Matter, and as a capitalist society, we must spend like Black Lives Matter. Mark Yeager. I listened to the report that Chief Serafin made on April 27th. I was struck by one thing. It seemed that his greatest, if not only concern, was whether his officers had acted within the limits of policy and within the limits of the law. I did not hear any creative thinking about how the incident could possibly have gone differently. After watching the video of the arrest of Ms. Lewis, as well as the footage from the various body cameras and dashboard cameras, it seemed to me that the police officers treated her with a great deal of violence and disrespect. I was troubled by the way Officer Cervantes was barking orders at her and her boyfriend when it seemed that the couple did not really understand what the situation was or why the police were involved at all. I did not see any de-escalation techniques nor any effort to find a way to help Ms. Lewis become less upset. I repeatedly hear that police departments are frustrated by the overall lack of trust and cooperation they receive from the public. I have to wonder, does that surprise city officials in light of these troubling videos? I have to wonder, do city officials and Chief Serafin consider how police actions look when viewed through the lens of an average person on the street? I have to wonder, have they considered whether the policy is too heavy on threat response, too light on threat reduction? I have to wonder whether there are techniques that serve to reduce the level of tension rather than raising it through threats and intimidation. I have to wonder where we'd be if Chief Serafin had said the actions of the officers fell within departmental policy, but upon reflection, I can see we could have done better. We'll all be working on that. Corin Langford, I'm writing this email as a concerned citizen of Urbana-Champaign. I think I speak for a lot of people when I ask that I would like a meeting to be called discussing the replan and redistribution of the city's funds for fiscal year 2021. The Urbana police budget needs to be re-examined. Right now, there's a mass conversation regarding police brutality against Black citizens. We have these cases in our very own city. I want the charges against Aaliyah Lewis dropped. I've seen the video. Many have seen the video. She's walking away when Sergeant Cervantes comes and grabs her, pushing her to the ground. What law enforcement precedent necessitates grabbing and tackling an innocent woman for arguing? Why do we have our own cops carrying military weaponry? I also, for a town of 80,000, I will correct that. This is a town of 42,000. I also want all charges dropped for the incident at Marketplace Mall. Police showed up in riot gear inciting violence. We know that the justice system sets excessive bonds on purpose. We know the judges are involved, the state's attorney, district attorney. We know this and call it by its name, systemic racism. We also know that Mayor Marlin has proudly publicly shared being endorsed by the Urbana Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 70. There is a study after study that over-policing communities result in more crimes. We need to invest and protect our citizens instead of hunting them down. Logan Middleton, dear Urbana City Council, in advance, here we go. Last week, the Urbana City Council members spoke at length about recognizing white privilege and combating structural racism. Yet as long as there is no justice for Aaliyah Lewis, these statements remain empty, performative, and self-serving. As of yesterday, Minneapolis City Council announced their commitment to disband the Minneapolis Police Department, with the City Council President stating, "Our efforts at incremental reform have failed, period." Urbana City Council should follow the lead of Minneapolis. City Council, I believe that you all know the racist police brutality committed against Aaliyah Lewis is absolutely connected to the police murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Nina Pop, Tony McDade, and countless others. As I believe you all know, Urbana is complicit in racist police violence. As such, I'm calling on you in the city of Urbana to drop all charges against Aaliyah Lewis now, immediately fire the officers who assaulted Aaliyah Lewis, vote down Chief Serafson's reappointment, take steps to minimize the impact of policing by defunding and ultimately abolishing the police department. Marcy Adelson Schaefer. Dear Mayor Marlin and Urbana City Council, please do not reappoint Chief Serafin until the investigation is complete into the officers that beat Aaliyah Lewis. How are we to know that he didn't cover it up? How do we know that Chief has not been encouraging a climate of distrust of Black and brown people? Elliot Schultz. My name is Elliot Schultz. I'm a former resident of Urbana, moved to Champaign a couple of years ago. I stand with my brothers and sisters in Urbana who are fighting for justice for Aaliyah Lewis. The use of force displayed by the officers was an egregious overreaction that can be explained only by racism. Those cannot be justice until those officers and officers involved are held accountable for propagating the white supremacist foundations of the criminal justice system. Vote no on the reappointment of Chief Serafin, drop all charges against Aaliyah Lewis, initiate a truly meaningful and independent investigation, make the Civilian Police Review Board a meaningful oversight, and comply with the ordinance. Austin Hoffman. I've been a resident of Urbana for 2 years in Ward 5. I'm writing today to once again urge the council to do all it's within its power to get the charges against Miss Aaliyah Lewis dropped, to place all officers involved in her arrest on leave, pending an outside investigation. I also join many other citizens in voicing my concern over the defanged Civilian Police Review Board. Finally, I urge the council to vote down the reappointment of Chief Serafin. With that said, swapping out police chiefs or diversifying police forces along racial or gender lines is not the answer to the problems of racism and police violence plaguing our community. Indeed, it's been well documented that these are merely temporary and palliative solutions to deeper systemic issues. No doubt you've heard a veto-proof majority of the Minneapolis City Council intends to disband the city's police force. I believe that Urbana needs to follow their lead. Most of you will probably dismiss this as outrageous and idealistic, and if this is your instinct, I would like to quickly remind you that racist and classist policing has been a facet of American life since the country's inception and continues to be so. Historically, policing serves two primary functions: the repression of the working class, the enforcement of a white supremacist social order. When modern policing was born in the city of Boston in 1838, the force was used solely to protect private property, to break strikes and discipline industrial workers in the antebellum. In the antebellum South, policing was directly tied to slave patrols, which functioned to quell slave results and prevent slaves from escaping to the North. After emancipation, Southern police forces collaborated closely with the KKK to ensure that the racial hierarchy remained in place through convict leasing and Jim Crow legislation. These basic functions of policing, while they have taken on different and more insidious institutional forms, remain essentially unchanged. If you disagree, perhaps you're willfully ignorant of history, or worse, you are tacitly in support of this system of oppression. But more likely, your political imaginations have been so stunted by a diluted culture which worships and enshrines police as the answer to all of our social problems. Police are not social workers. They are not mental health professionals. They are not specialists in addressing sexual or domestic violence. They are not community organizers of any kind. Yet we continue to have them function or perform these functions, even though they fail miserably at them and ruin and destroy lives. I firmly believe in this country, in this community, we have the power to care for and uplift one another without police. It's your responsibility to help realize that power. I would recommend you visit 8toabolition.com to become informed of pragmatic solutions to end policing, inspired by the thought of Black feminist theorists like Angela Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore. Please do your job. Please imagine otherwise, because the lives of your constituents depend upon it. Janet Elaine Guthrie. When recognized and responded to with care and compassion, times of crisis may become opportunities for needed growth and reform. May this be such a time in our city of Urbana. Having learned that the annual reappointment of Chief Seraphin is on the agenda, I took time to review the April 27th presentation. What I heard suggests a limited view of leadership responsibility. Repeatedly, Chief Seraphin cites two criteria: departmental policy and the law, leaving a clear impression that if these are checked off, then all is well. Granted, policing as we know it is difficult, and being a police chief is a tough role. I participated in the Citizens Police Academy as a way to grow my own understanding in this regard. Indeed, because of the challenges we face with building community trust and reforming how we deal with systemic injustice, we need law enforcement leadership that functions beyond the managerial, that looks deeply into situations and patterns, that demonstrates the grace and humility to admit the need for improvements in policies and procedures. Such leadership is characterized by open communication, non-defensiveness, and compassion. I would hope that Chief Seraphin aspires to be such a transformative leader, and that he will be provided with ongoing professional development and mentoring in these areas. I would advocate for these leadership expectations to be clearly spelled out for the police chief, along with periodic means for evaluating them. This will be critical as the city moves ahead with important next steps, including endorsing and implementing the Illinois NAACP and Illinois Association of Chiefs shared principles. From all our city officials, I ask for open acknowledgement of the problems, a comprehensive commitment to anti-racist policies and de-escalation, demilitarization, and a willingness to accept citizen review and input, not merely as an appeals process, but routinely as a way of encouraging accountability and building trust. Thank you for your attention to my concerns. That's Reverend Dr. Janet Elaine Guthrie. Brian Burrow-Weiss, I wrote in to participate in last Monday's meeting, and my email was not read and relegated to the dustbin of some PDF file somewhere. It seems that the mayor and police chief believe they can totally ignore Urbana citizens' public input about police brutality and policing. We have a sham civilian police review board, which is the way you seem to like it. In my last input, I mentioned that I was a consultant in urban economics. We wrote study conclusions that reflected the will of the people who were paying the bills. I believe that's your desire by hiring an outside firm to study the unnecessary violence in the Leah Lewis case and possibly policing in Urbana. You just want someone to validate the wrongs you've already committed. Without a new police chief and actual structural change to the police department and the Civilian Police Review Board, we will have truly lost the caring community we once had. Clearly, in the short run, you should not renew the contract. Zoe Foote. My name is Zoe Foote. I live in Urbana. I was born and raised here and returned after college and a few years out west to pursue a master's degree at UIUC. I lived in both Champaign and Urbana. I'm very invested in my hometown, as I have seen it evolve in many ways over the years. At the same time, I'm extremely concerned with the city of Urbana's and the city of Champaign's investment in the police department at the expense of critical youth education and social services. I'm therefore writing to demand that the City Council vote to reapportion funds currently allocated to the police department to instead support evidence-based programs and services that, unlike police presence, promote the well-being of our citizens. It is morally reprehensible to dedicate so many resources to police while citizens struggle to afford basic necessities, and many more lack access to essential services, including childcare, detox centers, and necessary mental health resources. I urge the City Council to enact legislation that will hold the police accountable, to overturn policies that allow police to engage in unlawful behavior. Police are marching in the streets because they know these actions will result in a healthier, more just society. I implore you to please listen to the needs of your constituents and take immediate action to address our concerns. We can say Black Lives Matter as all we want, but as a community, we must show that Black lives matter, and as a capitalist society, we must spend like Black Lives Matter. Tanya Josek, Urbana City Council. I'm writing again to request that all charges against Aaliyah Lewis be dropped for a true, meaningful, and independent investigation to be conducted. And while that investigation is underway, the officers who beat Miss Lewis to be put on leave. I cannot believe almost 2 months later, this is still an issue the City Council is discussing. Police need to be held accountable for their actions. Ms. Lewis was at a safe distance from the officers, and these officers already had the situation they came to deal with under control. It is unbelievable that the city continues to defend the officers after they engaged and beat a citizen whose biggest threat to these officers was this citizen was talking to them. Even if they were yelling at these officers, the officers should have the restraint to allow that citizen to practice their First Amendment rights and say whatever they want, especially since, again, she was at a large distance, not a threat, and was likely already shaken up. Over the past few months, we have seen officers be faced with angry white Americans yelling threats and waving guns around in officers' faces, and yet these officers stood their ground and no action by the police is taken against them. I'm confident that had Miss Lewis been white, these officers would have just left the scene. Stop defending racism in Urbana. The city has been showing how its citizens are demanding change. Let this change start with those charges being dropped and a meaningful independent investigation be conducted. The city of Urbana needs to support its citizens. In doing so, I would also vote no on the reappointment of Chief Serafin, who continues to support racist actions conducted by the force. Finally, I request that the Citizen Police Review Board have meaningful oversight and comply with the ordinance. If the city plans to move forward, it needs to reconsider the role of the police. At a minimum, the police need to be held accountable for their actions and should be demilitarized. Their job is to protect and serve the community, not protect and serve white people, and you don't need a militarized police to enforce laws or protect and serve the community. The city can allocate funds to hire and train public safety individuals who specialize in dealing with situations like domestic abuse, mental health, who can deal with these situations, instead of police who do not have the training to help these people. This is just a start. City needs to start thinking about what's best for citizens, how they can best help the citizens. Let's start that narrative now. Jeff Putney lives in Champaign. In the past weeks, we've seen deep truths about the systemic nature of white supremacy policing in our country brought to everyone's attention. We have seen the police precinct that defended murderous cops burned to the ground by their own community and with popular support. We have seen schools vowing to end their contracts with police and redirect that money to true community needs. We have seen the Minneapolis lawmakers pass a resolution vowing to disband their police department. Locally, the tone is no different. We have seen massive street protests in Champaign and Urbana with thousands marching at a time. We have seen community unrest and anger met with militarized riot police who released violence against our own community members. Those most affected by police violence in our community have raised their voices to let it be known the conditions that have fomented uprisings around the country exist here in Champaign County, exist here too. Champaign County's United Pride organization has banned uniformed police from participating in the Pride Parade. The name of Aaliyah Lewis has been chanted again and again in our streets. And at the same time, I've been appalled at seeing local politicians turning out for photo ops in the streets. While they leave local victims of police violence to suffer under the threat of state violence, violence that will be carried out on their behalf through the use of felony prosecution and prison time. We do not need you in the streets chanting with us if you will not use your positions of power to make difficult decisions that materially support the needs of the community. Right now, you have the opportunity to be among the loudest voices from behind your desks if you demand substantive change. I truly believe if you're looking to lead in this fight for racial justice, you must do the following. Call for charges against Aaliyah Lewis be dropped, prosecute the officers who were involved. Block the reappointment of Chief Serafin. Apologize for the city's abhorrent handling of the case. Call for all charges to be dropped against anyone arrested when our city released militarized riot police against our community members at Marketplace Mall. Begin the process of discussing how Champaign-Urbana can defund our police and divert money to programs that creates safer conditions for everyone in the community. Okay. Here. Gotta get my light to come back on here. This email is from Preston James. The purpose of this communication is to speak in support of Urbana Chief Bryant Serafin. With the climate of our society, I understand the need to want to point a finger at what would be deemed as low-hanging fruit. That's the easy target. I am as well angry, frustrated, disappointed, and outright disgusted by the senseless death and violence committed by those who do not deserve to be associated with the badge. There are some out there that do not represent what it means to be the shepherd, and I believe our justice system has not changed enough with our societal changes and needs to be reevaluated based on current priorities and issues that we face today. This is larger than a municipal issue, so I'll stop there. With that said, I am proud to know personally that Serafin is one of the good ones. To provide a little backing to my statement, Chief Serafin worked to understand, not just to hear issues that the community brought to his attention. Serafin worked to build bridges and not block them. Serafin came to more events than I can count on personally when he could have just sent officers to mingle, and he communicated with the community. Chief Serafin helped shape the community relations specialist position, which Preston James previously held, and he supported professionally and personally our self-made kings. Serafin supported the Reentry Council, Trauma and Resilience Initiative, CPRB during their use of force refresher training, implicit bias, and many other community connections activities. In my 46 years on this earth as an African-American man, I've had contact with some very closed-minded law enforcement officials that have appeared to have been racially motivated based on their bias, over-aggressive, and bullied as a child. Over my 15 years with the city of Urbana, I have never experienced any of those types of actions from Serafin. Is he perfect? Of course not. None of us are. We are all doing our best to hopefully be viewed favorably by our Creator at the end of our race. As we have previously stated, we will put all of these communications that were received before 7 o'clock into the meeting record for tonight. And people have expressed some frustration on what happens to these emails afterwards. And I actually am looking for ideas on how to start to create a narrative and preserve these communications as a way for us to tell the story of our actions going forward. So people with experience in doing that in a creative way that's meaningful, that will preserve this as part of the overall narrative in our journey going forward, I would really appreciate hearing ideas along that way. So I just wanted to, just share my thoughts tonight with the community. I appreciate the input we've been getting. It's clear that we have to reform many of our policing policies and practices, all the way from recruiting, hiring, training, evaluating, and establishing a system of accountability. We've been listening to you for many weeks. We all were absolutely appalled as we watched the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, watched the Aaliyah Lewis arrest in Urbana, and we're now facing a lot of work ahead of us. We will continue to listen, and we will work on this with your help. I have never shied away from hard work, and when I make a commitment, I follow through. That's been true my entire life, and particularly my work on the Urbana City Council and as mayor. We are committed to doing what's necessary to make policing in Urbana the best it can be. Chief Serafin, the Urbana City Council, city staff, and the community are committed to this. We're going to be open, honest, critical, approachable, And we need a police chief who has these qualities. Chief Seraphin is a man of integrity. And those who know him and worked with him will confirm that. Most of the emails that we received over the past couple of days are heartfelt, and they're based on not knowing this man personally. They're based on viewing the video, listening to the comparison of the officers' activities and actions to the current policies in place in the city of Urbana. That is what the first step in any review of an incident has to be. You look at what happened and you compare it to policies. You may hate the policies, you may need to change the policies, but that is the first responsibility. And often, and this is not just true in the city of Urbana, all over the country, the policies may be very different from what people think is acceptable behavior, but that's where we have to start. We can change the policies. We've received many emails from people demanding that we not reappoint Chief Seraphin. And based on what they saw on that video and what they heard in the weeks following. But what I look for in a staff member, especially a police chief, is what others who know him personally have found. Chief Seraphin, I believe, has the heart. He's got the attitude to want to be part of the change. I have served him personally for many years. He listens to people before making a decision. He's even-tempered. He's approachable. He follows through. He is willing to work with us to make the changes we need. And I think he has the temperament and the attitude and the willingness to work going forward. And it's going to take time. The law enforcement system did not appear overnight. I know everyone is impatient and want to change things right away, but this is going to take time. It's going to have to take place in concert with changes at the state and federal level, systemic changes. If we as a nation actually start tackling some of our hardest problems, our hardest social problems, in inequities in healthcare, education, income, housing, and if we actually develop a political backbone to address gun control, mental health treatment, substance abuse, communities all over the country can greatly reduce their dependence on police departments. Often it's a 911 call that comes in for dealing with all the results of all these issues. Just in the last week that I know about, we had 3 separate calls for people having a mental health crisis. If this society had a system for helping people with mental health issues all through their lives, we would not end up calling the police when people are having a crisis. So we are in the midst of a pandemic. The COVID-19 is just the latest pandemic. The pandemic of racism has sickened this country for 400 years, and we as a community are committed to trying to eradicate it. We need to repair, rebuild, change how we do things, and that will begin with policing in Urbana. So I've listened to everything. I've read your emails, as I know all the council members have as well. And again, I will tell you, here's what we plan to do in the short term. There will be an independent review of the Leo Lewis incident. We're finalizing the details of the proposal. It hasn't been completely finalized yet. We're just working out the scope of the work. But we're going to be asking the firm to examine not only what was done, but the policies behind those practices, and to make specific recommendations for change. And I'm waving my arm because I have motion sensors in my office and the light keeps going off. So we're looking at more importantly, we're going to be looking at the policies behind the current practices and looking for specific recommendations for change. We'll work with the NAACP and the State Police Chiefs Association to affirm the 10 shared principles. There was a misstatement earlier. I'll be meeting with Ms. Pearson this week, and we'll set a date. We're targeting August or September, so we've targeted a month, but we'll be looking at specific dates, and then we'll share that. And then I will be asking for the community to help in planning that event, and in a way that I do it safely during this pandemic, but we will do it. I understand that the Champaign Police Department, the University of Illinois, Parkland Police Departments have all adopted these 10 shared principles. I'm sorry we're the last to do so, but we look forward to the honest dialogue to guide this process, and frankly, it's going to be informed by the events of the last few months. We will revise, in fact, it's already underway, policies and practices of the Civilian Police Review Board. It's one of the many things in Urbana that needed to be fixed. When I came into office 3 years ago, I discovered there was a great deal of internal infrastructure that had to be updated, repaired, or reorganized. And we have systematically been tackling that for the past 3 years. We spent a lot of time focused on the budget for the past 3 years because frankly, that was the underpinning for everything else we do in this city. And it was built on a house of cards in a lot of ways. So through very disciplined decisions by the city council and by management, we clawed ourselves out of a deficit and restored financial stability to this city, which will position us to grow and provide the programs and services that and fulfill our obligations that we need to. Even in the midst of a pandemic, we're in a stronger position now than we were 3 years ago. And we can't do anything until we had stabilized our city's financial, got its financial house in order, and laid the groundwork for many other things. So yes, there are lots of things we need to do. It's taken longer than anyone wants, but we had to start with the most fundamental thing first, and that was making sure we had the wherewithal to pay for what we want to do. We are going to and we are going to review the Urbana Police Department's use of force policies. Several council members and I have signed on to the Obama Foundation's My Brother's Keeper pledge, which includes review of the use of force, community engagement, public reporting, and reform. I think one of the council members last week pointed out that the city of Champaign has a civilian member on the internal use of force committee. And if you recall, that's the first place that use of force is reviewed after an incident. And I think that's a good idea, and the chief is supportive as well. And just to keep things in perspective, the city of Urbana's police officers respond to about 25,000 calls for service in a year, and roughly 100 to 150 involve use of force, and every single one of those is reviewed. So we have a tremendous need in our community. Our officers are out there all the time responding to citizens, and most of those calls do not involve use of force. And I just learned that the U.S. Conference of Mayors has just formed a task force on police reform and racial justice, and we'll be using, I'm sure they'll be providing a great number of resources for us to use. So again, I believe Chief Seraphin needs to be part of this process if we are going to reform our local police department. He's willing to change things, he's open to challenges, and he's going to work to understand and learn from you in order to build a better Urbana. He is one of the good ones, and I want to give you all the opportunity to get to know him. And we are all accountable to you, the public. So there's some confusion about what this appointment actually means. In the city of Urbana, there are a number of employees, department heads and upper level management division and chiefs of the fire chief and the police chief who are on annual appointments. They do not have contracts. They're appointed their appointments run, basically coincide with the fiscal year. So that means all of these people have, their terms are up on June 30th. The thing about these appointees are, and I think at least one person mentioned it in an email, they're equivalent of an at-will employee in that they don't have a contract, and they can be removed at any time if their performance isn't up to what is expected. So delaying for 2 weeks an appointment would be, I believe, not productive. We have a lot of work to do, and I think we need to get started right now. And I ask the community to give us the chance to regain and rebuild trust, and we will use the same dedication and focus that we have spent rebuilding much of our internal infrastructure in the city over the past 3 years. And that was a very focused and successful effort. And it's going to take all of us, and this time the community has to be involved. So I don't want to delay any further. I truly want to get started now, and we will get started now. And I am asking for you to join with us in that effort. Okay, that will conclude public input. We will, again, I would love suggestions on how to tell the story of this effort. I think this is the beginning of a movement here, and I really would like suggestions on how to tell that story. And I know there are many creative people in this community. So we are now scheduled to go into a closed session. So the way that will work, my assistant is sending you all an email, and you will be given a link to a separate Zoom session, and we will leave this meeting and go into the closed session, and then we will come back into the open meeting. Before we go, I do need a motion to go into closed session.
Yeah, I'll move to go into closed session to consider the purchase of lease or real property pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C5, and to consider the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C1.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved by Bill, seconded by Eric. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Holbrook,
Yes.
Percy, Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes, but for the record, I want to say we didn't go for 2 hours of public input there, and I really think we should go there. Meeting started at 7. We didn't start public input until probably 7:20, 7:30, and it is now 9 o'clock, and we haven't given 2 hours. So just want to make that known.
Roberts,
Yes.
Wu,
Yes.
Mayor Marlin.
Yes. Okay, we'll see you in the other session.
Councilmember Roberts, just to note, you're still in the open session. So if you go back to the open session, you want to click the leave button in the bottom right-hand corner. There you go. You got it. Thanks. For those of you on the Zoom meeting, I say some people just joining us now, the Urbana City Council is currently in closed session. They will return to the open session meeting once they're done with their business in closed session. It looks like all the council members and the mayor is back in the public Zoom session.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is our budget presentation. We're coming up on,
Diane, do we need to close?
oh, yes, sorry, yes. Need to come out of closed session. Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we come out of closed session and re-enter the full session of City Council.
Is there a second? Moved by Dennis, seconded by Mary Alice. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Is the clerk here?
I'm getting her on right now. She's on. She should be coming in.
She's there. I see her name.
No roll call needed. We just need a motion in a second.
And a voice vote?
Yes.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. That motion passes. We're out of closed session, back into open session. We have budget presentation coming up on the agenda next. We're also coming up against our 10:30 regular meeting deadline. Is there a motion to extend until 11:15?
Sure, I'll make that motion. Not exactly with excitement, but I will.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. This meeting will be continued, obviously, till Wednesday, but we'll get a start on it tonight. So I would introduce Elizabeth Hannon and Don Ho.
Actually, Don needs to share his screen because he's got the presentation.
Yeah. I'm working on it.
You know what? I'm going to propose something different. Given the late hour, is it City Clerk, is it possible for us to move to the Committee of the Whole report and take care of that business tonight, and then we can start fresh with the budget presentation on Wednesday? Would that make sense to council?
Yes.
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 Fine with me.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that, Don.
Yes.
Diane, we'll need a motion in a second on that.
Okay,
change.
so we'll need a motion to move to section F of the agenda, which is reports of the standing committees.
I'll make that motion that we adjust our agenda accordingly.
I strongly second that motion.
Okay, so all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, we will move to reports of standing committees. Jared Miller.
Last week, the Committee of the Whole met and pushed forward a number of ordinances and resolutions to the full council, all with recommendations for approval. First of which was ordinance number 2020-03-014, an ordinance approving an amendment to a planned unit development at 1208 Bradley Avenue, which came from plan case number 2396-PUD-20. On behalf of the committee, I move approval.
I'll second that one. Dennis Roberts.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Dennis. Any discussion? Bill? Oh, that was just your screen coming on. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Holbrook,
Yes.
Percy,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes, and thank you for managing to include the right-of-way possibility for extending the path along that development.
Whoa.
Yes.
That motion passes.
All right, next up, we have ordinance number 2020-06-030, an ordinance approving an agreement with Union Development Holdings LLC and Scion Urbana Land LLC. On behalf of the committee, I move approval.
I'll second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Bill Brown. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Holbrook,
Yes.
Percy,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
Woo.
Yes.
That motion passes.
Okay, next up is our last ordinance, ordinance number 2020-06-031, an ordinance approving the City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium consolidated plan for fiscal years 2020 to 2024 and the annual action plan for fiscal year 2020 to 2021. On behalf of the committee, I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Eric. Will the clerk please, any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Holbrook,
Yes.
Percy,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
Woo.
Yes.
That motion passes.
Okay, two resolutions. The first of which is resolution number 2020-06-024R, a resolution approving the Housing Rehabilitation Program operational guidelines for program years 2020 to 2024. On behalf of the committee, I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Mary Alice. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Holbrook,
Yes.
Percy,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
Woo.
Yes.
That motion passes.
Our last resolution from the committee is resolution number 2020-06-025R, a resolution approving a COVID-19 program manual for fiscal year 2020 to 2024. On behalf of the committee, I move approval.
I'll second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Eric. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Holbrook,
Yes.
Percy,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
Woo.
Yes.
That motion passes. And that concludes the business carried forward from last week. We will pick up on Wednesday at 7 o'clock with the budget presentation, and then we'll continue the rest of the regular agenda. So I would request a motion for reconvening on Wednesday at 7 o'clock.
I'll make the motion that the city council continue this meeting on Wednesday at 7 o'clock. That would be the 10th of May, June.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Moved by Dennis, seconded by Eric. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay. This meeting is continued till Wednesday. Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.